Welcome to the Teach Me Lit podcast. I'm Sophie Tuvey and I love talking about books and helping you to revise for English literature and go deeper in the texts you're studying.
Today I'm talking about justice, or the lack of justice, in To Kill a Mockingbird. Now, you can approach a question on justice in many different ways, and obviously, there's no one right way. But one thing I would say is, if you're doing an essay on To Kill a Mockingbird to do with the theme of justice, and you don't mention the trial of Tom Robinson, then something really big is missing. So you definitely need to think about structuring your essay so that you really give central focus to the trial of Tom Robinson. So it's really important when you are writing an essay that it's fluently moving from one point to the next. So you don't want to think about your essay in terms of 4 totally disconnected areas of the novel that you're talking about. You want to think about how logically your points can flow one from the other and build up. And this is where you need to think about the connections that Harper Lee makes between the different threads and strands of the novel, and actually how they tie together around this issue of justice. So, for example, you could start by thinking about the earlier section of the novel. The focus in the part 1 of the novel is Boo Radley for some of it, as Jem and Scout play around trying to make Boo Radley come out of his house. And obviously we learn a lot about the past of Arthur and about the mistakes that he made, the way his father punished him harshly by keeping him basically indoors for 15 years. We've got these various snatches of rumours about him driving a pair of scissors into his dad's leg. We don't really know how true these things are. And then basically Boo, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Boo turns into a ghost, hence the kind of pun on the name Boo. And it seems that some great injustice has been done here because, it's a relatively minor offence. Arthur seemed to be a typical teenage boy doing teenage things. And the punishment that his father exerted upon him was disproportionate to his misdemeanors. And it really shows the judgmentalism of extreme Christianity in the South. So there's many denominations of Christianity in the southern states, but Miss Maudie describes the Radleys as foot-washing Baptists. They're particularly extreme in the way that they interpret the Bible. And she also says that the Bible in the hand of one man is worse than a whiskey bottle in the hand of another. So there's that idea that whereas someone like Bob Ewell, drinks too much and, neglects his children, actually is a different type of neglect in what the Radleys do to Arthur Radley, their own son, that, they give this very extreme religious punishment to him. And then the focus of the novel in part 2 moves off Boo Radley and then more on to the trial. And the trial is obviously a lot about justice because, we know that Maycomb is not a real place, but really is emblematic of many small Southern American towns, as in southern states. And we know that the way that the town is described as tired and old, with the courthouse sagging, is again symbolic of the way justice is neglected here. Now, it's worth unpicking why are these issues so endemic, with injustice in Maycomb. And really, you have to go way back to the idea of imperialism. The idea that America was colonized by men with guns and men with weapons. And really, they've never shaken off that idea that strength is a man with a gun. Now, obviously, Atticus, through the whole novel, is trying to teach Jem and Scout that courage is not the guy with the gun. Courage is actually something quite different. Courage is, when you know you're licked before you begin, but you begin anyway and you see it through no matter what. That's Atticus's, kind of life statement about courage. But the point is, why is justice such an issue? Well, America has been colonized by men with guns who've taken over the land, cast out the Native Americans, and made them into the other, and basically marginalized them. Well, this is what's happening in the novel, not with Native Americans, but with the black community and with Boo Radley. There are people in the novel who don't conform to Maycomb's ideals, and basically the men with guns have won. They have established, the kind of white dominance in Maycomb, and so the black community must be suppressed and kept in their place. And we see here the legacy of slavery as well, because even though slavery was abolished, long before these events in the novel take place, there's a legacy of slavery in the southern states, because, economically, the black community is at a huge disadvantage from these, many, many years where they've been subjected and where they haven't been paid. Even in the world of the story in the 1930s, it's only Calpurnia, her son Zebo, and maybe one other person in the church who can read and write. And that illiteracy continues the cycle of inequality. And you've got that description, haven't you, of the church. The Negroes worshipped in it on Sunday, the white men gambled in it on weekdays. That idea that they've got to share their place of worship with white men gambling in it just to make enough money to pay to maintain the building. So you can see the legacy of slavery in the injustices in Maycomb's structures, and obviously their courtroom is a white courtroom. It's a white jury, it's a white judge, white lawyers, and the black people are physically located on the balcony in a separate area. Now, as the trial of Tom Robinson plays out, in the eyes of Gem and Scout, interestingly, they're in the black balconies, they're seeing it through the eyes of the marginalised in the community. It seems a very clear case. Tom Robinson could not have been guilty of attacking and raping Mayella Ewell. He's got a disability on his left. It seems that she was beaten by someone who led with the left. It kind of emerges that Mayella's had a very poor and miserable existence, and it seems very likely that she is the one who tried to kiss Tom Robinson. Her father saw, and then took out his anger on her, beating her up, and then proceeded to accuse Tom of raping her, knowing full well that his story would not be questioned in terms of him being the white man. His word will be taken above Tom's as the black man, and so Bobby Ewell knows where this kind of case ends. And obviously you can refer to the Scottsboro case at the time, where you've got something very similar happening, where as people in the novel say, when it's a white man's word against a black man's, the white man always wins. That's the reality of justice in these southern states. And obviously Harper Lee's drawing on real historical cases as well that add weight to this. So whilst the world of Maycomb is a fictional world, the trial of Tom Robinson is a very real scenario that was happening in southern states, and it's certainly true that there were people, innocent people, condemned as guilty. You've also got the presence of lynching as well in the novel, but it's not a huge focus. But the fact that the lynch mob turns up, they end up going away. But there's that reality that in the South these things would happen. The white men would take it upon themselves to kill black defendants before they even had gone to trial. Denying them the justice of that legal procedure. Now, why is it that Maycomb has these structures that are so filled with flaws? Well, a lot of it is about power, isn't it? If the white man wants to stay in power, he has to oppress the black man. And basically, there's a necessity of creating outsiders in order to create belonging. So if you create your perfect community of who's in the inner circle, you have to have those who are not. And that's why people like, Boo Radley are ostracized, because it's a way of making the people on the inside feel better about themselves. Now, let's go back to this idea of linking Boo Radley with the Tom Robinson thread, with this theme of justice. Now, obviously, we know what happens in the trial. Tom is convicted, a great miscarriage of justice takes place. And Atticus isn't honestly very surprised by this. He very much expected this to happen. And Jem is the one who is absolutely devastated as a child, naively thinking, of course we've won, it's so obvious. And then seeing those verdicts of guilty, 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 it was like each one is like a stab between Jem's shoulders, and he really feels it keenly. And both he and Dill cry, at the injustice the black community is suffering in this trial, that they're made aware of for the first time. It's well worth sort of saying here as well, from the perspective of the black community, that this kind of white privileged viewpoint of their world could equally be seen as very wanting. The hashtag Own Voices movement is all about black writers giving the voice to their own community. And, many people struggle with this idea of, why is it that the black community is being depicted through a white writer's experience of the black community? Why is Atticus presented as the white saviour? And I think today, a lot of people struggle with that. And I think it's worth saying that people receive this text very differently. You could also have a look at the publication of Go Set a Watchman, which upset a lot of people because Atticus says some things in that novel that seem to be more racist. So it's worth unpicking a lot of these traditional readings. But anyway, I wanted to talk about the link between the Boo Radley thread and the Tom Robinson thread was this theme of justice. Now, Tom gets condemned and actually dies when he tries to escape. And he just I think he just goes a bit sort of crazy with the confinement of being in prison and knowing that he's unjustly imprisoned. He tries to escape and he gets shot, I think 17 times, which is, again, it's so excessive. It's so unnecessary. Even Alexandra can see, how wrong this treatment is. But what happens in the latter section of the story is that there's a form of poetic justice. So Bob Ewell, who to all intents and purposes won the trial, he got Tom Robinson, essentially he got him killed one way or another. But Bob gets his comeuppance, and there's a pattern in the novel of Bob being the aggressive white man. Perhaps emblematic of the original imperialist pioneers who came over and, shoved out the Native Americans and took over the land, maybe. Bob Ewell is an oppressor. He clearly oppresses his own daughter, Mayella. She's basically a bit of a slave looking after all of his children. There's a suggestion of sexual abuse there as well. He oppresses Tom Robinson, and then he tries to attack Jem and Scout. He basically is punishing them for not conforming, for their father's decision to represent Tom Robinson and represent him properly in the court case. And as Atticus comments, he basically has made Bob Ewell a fool in front of the whole of Maycomb, because he's shown up his story to be ridiculous, and anyone with good sense could see that. Now, when Bob Ewell attacks Scout and Jem right at the end of the novel, who is it who rescues them? Well, it's Boo. And at this point, these two different threads that have been kept pretty separate the whole novel suddenly come together in a really stunning convergence that I think it speaks a lot about this message of justice that the author has been trying to emphasize. So Boo, himself a marginalized character, himself a victim of injustice and oppression, helps to break the cycle of oppression through Bob Ewell by killing him. Now, in this act of killing Bob Ewell, Boo is seen as a heroic rescuer of Jem and Scout. He overcomes so much to step out of his house, which obviously he hasn't done for years, in order to physically confront Bob Ewell and fight him. And this is the sort of real courage that Atticus has been referring to the whole time. The irony is that as Boo helps to break the cycle of oppression by killing Bob, the oppressor, he actually fails to break his own cycle of oppression, because this isn't really a happy ever after for Boo Radley, is it? In one sense, it's too late for Boo. He has become a ghost, and it's really interesting that when we finally see him, he is described as being very pale, with watery eyes, white skin. He's sweating, he's coughing. He's a ghost of a man. He has been reduced to nothing, and in a sense, it's too late for Boo. He comes out, he acts in this one heroic act of saving Jem and Scout, but then he goes back into his house and Scout never sees him again. So there's that poignancy that his cycle of oppression never gets broken. But Lee uses Boo as the instrument to save Scout and Jem, and this is where the novel ends. Jem and Scout, the future generation. This was written and published in 1960. So, the readers, like Jem and Scout, were growing up back in the 30s, The hope is in them. Lee is suggesting that this generation of readers who are going to pick up this book, like Jem and Scout, into adulthood now, will look back on the injustices they have seen with their own eyes, and they will bring about justice for the future. And obviously this is the cusp of the civil rights movement, and obviously the black community made their own voices heard in a wonderful way in that movement in America. But there's a sense, isn't there, that Harper Lee is pointing us as readers towards standing up against oppression, standing up against injustice, and not allowing these cycles of oppression to continue anymore. So in that sense, I think there is a lovely joining of the threads of the Boo Radley story with the story of Tom Robinson. And in a sense, there is some justice for Tom at the end by Bob Ewell's death. It's obviously, it's not a perfect ending for everybody, because Tom Robinson can't be brought back to life. One innocent Mockingbird has been killed. But there's some redemption through Boo's actions, and there's the hope that this new generation will change the world forever.
If you've enjoyed this podcast and found it helpful, please hit subscribe and share it with a friend. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter. Just search for Teach Me Lit. I'm always open to requests, so if you want me to talk about a text you're studying, get in touch. Thank you for listening. See you next time on the Teach Me Lit podcast.